Morning. I'd like to call the special meeting of the Kankakee County Board to order, September 1st, 2021. Can we get a roll call, please?
Mr. Hess?
Present.
Mr. Throwland?
Microphone, sorry.
You want me to start over?
Please, yeah.
Mr. Hess?
Present.
Mr. Tholen? Mrs. Polk?
Present.
Mr. Snipes? Mr. Seroys?
Present.
Mr. Lear?
Present.
Mrs. Weber?
Present.
Mrs. Peters? Mr. Payton?
Present.
Mrs. Parker?
Present.
Mr. Fairfield?
Present.
Mr. Carrico?
Present.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Present.
Mr. Swanson?
Present.
Mr. Featherling?
Present.
Mr. Dunhill? Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Long?
Present.
Mr. Kirkstra?
Present.
Mr. Hunter?
Here.
Miss Bryan?
Present.
Mr. Collins?
Present.
Miss Hunter, or Hudson, sorry.
Present.
Mr. Smith?
Present.
Mr. Hildebrand?
Present.
Mr. Wheeler?
Present.
Okay.
Have quorum. I do have to mention the mask mandate, regardless of political affiliation, whatever your position is. It's not really regarded, the objections to some of these things are not just centered on one political side, it's on both. But in order for us to have liability insurance, we have to heed the governor's mandate in the county. So I'm just letting you guys know that that's why we have to wear the mask in the building, even if you're vaccinated, even if you disagree with it. It's not our decision, because the decision we make would affect the taxpayers in the event of a judgment. We don't even have a lawyer that will defend us for free, if you will, because that is, that's what our insurance does in those types of liability cases. So I'm just letting you know it's not really a decision that we take lightly, but that is the clear message from our liability carriers, is that you are not covered at all if anything were to happen. So, Mr. Featherling?
Does that mean they believe
That we're in an unsafe condition being here all together in this room?
I can't speculate on that. There is no social distancing requirement, just the mask. I can't speculate on their motives. Is there any other thoughts on that before we move on? I need a motion to go into executive session for pending litigation, 5 ILCS 120/2C11. Let's see, we'll go with Ms. Bryan, Mr. Kirkstra. All those in favor say, wait a minute, is that a roll call? Roll call, yeah, roll call. I caught myself.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Miss Polk?
Aye.
Mr. Seroys?
Aye.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mrs. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Mrs. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Carrico?
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Swanson?
Aye.
Mr. Featherling?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter? Miss Bryan?
Aye.
Mr. Collins?
Aye.
Miss Hudson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye. Motion carries. Give us a second to switch over, please. We are now back from executive session. All board members are still present. Yeah. I don't know. I'm just thinking about that. When everybody's on the mic, they take their mask off to talk, and everybody around them has a mask on. So I'm going to look into that. I'm going to see how that goes into the law. I don't think I have to have it on to talk, but we'll see. But I'm going to play it safe because I want insurance. So anyway, the first thing up is the under new business is the authorization for Kankakee County to join in litigation. Could we get the resolution read into the record, please?
Do you want me to read the number?
No, just
this?
the RE. Yeah,
The whole thing.
The whole thing.
Resolution authorizing for Kankakee County to join litigation. Whereas on August 2nd, 2021, Governor Pritzker signed the Illinois Way Forward Act, and whereas the Illinois Way Forward Act amends the Illinois Trust Act in that it requires local governments with an existing contract, intergovernmental agreement, or other agreements that is utilized to house or detain individuals for civil immigration violations to exercise the termination provision of said agreements as applied to housing and detaining individuals for civil immigration violation so later than January 1st, 2022. And whereas in accordance with the Illinois Way Forward Act, Kankakee County will be required to terminate their existing agreement. Whereas a result of the termination of said agreement, Kankakee County will suffer irreparable harm. And whereas, in addition to, more importantly, as a result of the termination of said agreement, the persons housed in Kankakee County will suffer irreparable harm as a result of being moved out of the state of Illinois away from friends, family, and other legal representation. Whereas that McHenry County, through its state's attorney's office, is prepared to file the attached complaint, see Exhibit A, and whereas on September 1st, 2021, a special meeting of the Kankakee County Board held pursuant to 55 ILCS 5-2-1002. After discussion, review, and consideration, the board recommends that Kankakee County join the litigation to be filed by McHenry County. Now, therefore, it be resolved by the Kankakee County Board after review, discussion, and consideration, authorized the chairman of the Kankakee County Board or his designee to join in the litigation and sign the complaint on behalf of Kankakee County. Passed and approved this 14th day of September 2021.
Say first.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, as amended, the Scrivener's error, is there a motion to accept this? We'll go with Mr. Swanson and Mr. Long with a second. Is there any discussion on the topic from anyone on the board? Okay, the only statements we'll have will be in the press release, and I just want to remind everybody watching that this lawsuit is about a violation of the U.S. Constitution. It has absolutely nothing to do with immigration, as this public act has nothing to do with immigration. ICE is still operating in Illinois, and the only people harmed are the employees here in the county, the systems and the citizens that we have that are depending on these services, and those families that now have to travel out of state to potentially and most likely for-profit prisons in other states to see their loved ones. So with that, is there any other thoughts on that? Ms. Ryan?
I would also say that the detainees are being harmed because they're going to be in our jail, which meets standards, whereas, you know, they're getting better health care, they're getting better services than they would in a private jail.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that? Alrighty. If not, let's do a roll call vote, please, if we could.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mrs. Polk?
Aye.
Mr. Seroys?
Aye.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mrs. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Mrs. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Carrico?
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Swanson?
Aye.
Mr. Featherling?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter? Mrs. Bryan?
Aye.
Mr. Collins?
Aye.
Ms. Hudson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye. Thank you for that unanimous vote. The next item on the agenda, we, and the sheriff can, you know, attest to this, we're lucky enough to find those corrections vans that are so hard to find right now. So we thought we'd put it on here to allow him to move on buying those before somebody scoops them up. So finance had approved it. We're using our lost revenue fund as outlined by the Department of Treasury is an allowed use of that. So is there a motion to accept? Mr. Long, Mr. Featherling, any other thoughts on that? That'll be a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Ms. Polk?
Aye.
Mr. Seroys?
Aye.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mrs. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Carrico?
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Swanson?
Aye.
Mr. Featherling?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter?
Aye.
Ms. Bryan?
Aye.
Mr. Collins?
Aye.
Ms. Hudson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye. Motion carries. I did fail to mention, expect that lawsuit to be filed this afternoon by McHenry County. We're joining in on their lawsuit, so we have the only 2 counties in Illinois that are to be harmed by this. Besides obviously the people who are in detention and their families. So with anything else, is there any other thoughts? We don't have new business, that's next week, but if anybody has anything, be happy to, for the betterment of the group. Otherwise, a motion to adjourn. Mr. Hess, second.
Polk.
We'll go with Ms. Polk.
Thank you.
All those in favor, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign.